just leave Jamaica and is running across Europe and America. And any musicians who love music, who really can feel music, will run down that music.
What happens when reggae royalty links up with rock legends, and it goes very wrong? In the late 70s, Peter Tosh, the militant heart of the Wailers, teamed up with the Rolling Stones for what was supposed to be a groundbreaking collaboration. Big names, big energy, big disaster. On paper, it looked like a power move, but behind the scenes, ego clashes, culture shocks, and a whole lot of smoke, both figuratively and literally. For decades, Tosh barely said a word about it, but now we're finally hearing what really went down between the rebel from Trenchtown and the kings of British rock. And let's just say, Peter held nothing back. If you thought this was just a story about music, buckle up. It's way deeper than that. Let's get into what caused the fallout, why it took so long to surface, and what Peter Tosh really thought about working with Mick and the crew. But first, let's get to know Tosh a little bit better. Humble beginnings. Peter Tosh didn't pick up music the way most people do. He didn't sit through years of boring lessons or suffer through clunky renditions of Mary Had a Little Lamb. Nah, he watched one man play a song for half a day, copied every move by memory, and nailed it on the first try. The man asked who taught him, and Tosh just shrugged and said, "You did?" Now that's raw talent. Born Winston Hubert McIntosh on October 19, 1944, in Westmoreland, Jamaica, Peter Tosh's early years were anything but easy. His parents abandoned him, and he was passed around between relatives like an afterthought. That kind of upbringing could have broken him. Instead, it lit a fire. After his aunt died when he was 15, Tosh moved to Trenchtown in Kingston. Trenchtown wasn't exactly a paradise, but for young artists like Tosh, it was a musical pressure cooker. What came out of it? Legendary. By the time he was 17, he'd gotten some education in Bluefields and started working as a welder, but sparks were flying somewhere else. His passion for music. That's when he crossed paths with Joe Higgs, a local vocal coach who offered free music lessons to neighborhood kids. Joe wasn't just a teacher, he was a gateway. Through him, Tosh met two other hungry young musicians, Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer. And just like that, reggae's most iconic trio was born. Back then, the three of them weren't exactly packing out stadiums. They were just kids with big dreams and a few chords to their names, playing on street corners and figuring things out one harmony at a time. Higgs taught them how to work as a unit. The blend of Tosh's raw edge, Marley's smooth voice, and Wailer's soul formed something electric. It was around this time that Winston McIntosh became Peter Tosh. And let's be real, Winston doesn't exactly scream reggae icon, but Peter had grit, Peter had presence, and soon enough, Peter had a voice people couldn't ignore. Even in those early street performances, he wasn't afraid to challenge authority, speak up for the oppressed, or ruffle feathers. He wasn't content just making music, he wanted to shake the system, and that rebellious streak would become his calling card. By the early 1960s, Tosh, Marley, and Wailer were finding their footing as a group. They sang together, wrote together, and worked tirelessly to make a name for themselves in a music scene that wasn't exactly opening doors for young Jamaican artists. But these three weren't just any trio. They had something to say, and people were starting to listen. Peter Tosh's rise from abandoned child to street performer to reggae revolutionary is more than a feel-good story. It's a lesson in resilience, raw skill, and refusing to stay silent. And while many know him for his later clashes with the music industry, including his infamous fallout with the Rolling Stones, Tosh's early life is proof that greatness doesn't always come from comfort. Sometimes it comes from chaos, grit, and a guitar played by memory. Career. Before the world knew him as the fierce voice behind Legalize It, Peter Tosh was the backbone of one of reggae's most legendary bands. By 1964, Tosh, Bob Marley, and Bunny Wailer had formed the Wailing Wailers, and at that point, Tosh wasn't just part of the group. He was holding the whole thing together. At the time, he was the only one in the band who knew how to play instruments. No joke, Tosh taught himself guitar and keyboards, and according to Bunny Wailer, that lit a fire under the rest of the crew to step up their musical game. The Wailing Wailers scored big right out of the gate with the ska hit Simmer Down. But fame didn't keep the original lineup together. By the end of 1965, singers Junior Braithwaite, Beverly Kelso, and Cherry Smith had exited stage left. Bob Marley dipped out too in 1906, moving to Delaware to work at a Chrysler factory and spend time with his mother. When he came back to Jamaica in early '67, though, something had shifted. He returned not just with a hunger for music, but with a new spiritual focus that matched Tosh and Bunny's beliefs. All three were now fully immersed in the Rastafari faith, and that changed everything. They dropped the wailing and became simply the Wailers. As Tosh put it, they chose that name because to wail meant to express deep emotion. And trust, Tosh had feelings to express. He also claimed that he was the one who taught Marley to play guitar, and Bunny backed that up, saying most of their early musicianship came straight from Tosh. In the mid-60s, the trio connected with Danny Sims and Johnny Nash, who signed them to Jad Records and secured their publishing through Cayman Music. Around that time, they started ditching ska's upbeat vibe and slowing things down. Their lyrics became sharper, heavier, and more about truth than rhythm. That shift gave birth to what we now call reggae. They worked with American singer Johnny Nash and eventually teamed up with Lee Scratch Perry. That collaboration gave us reggae staples like Soul Rebel, Small Axe, and Duppy Conqueror. The Barrett brothers, Aston and Carlton, had joined in 1970, tightening the rhythm section and elevating the sound even more. The Wailers' Best of album dropped in '71, produced by Leslie Kong, but things got complicated fast. In 1972, their contract was handed off to Island Records under Chris Blackwell. That led to the release of Catch a Fire and Burnin' in 1973, albums that changed reggae forever. But behind the scenes, things were getting messy. Tosh accused producers of recording his rehearsals and releasing them without permission under the name Peter Tosh in England. Then came tragedy. That same year, Tosh was in a devastating car crash. He was driving with his girlfriend Yvonne when they were hit by a car driving on the wrong side. Yvonne didn't survive. Tosh's skull was fractured. Not long after, Island Records rejected Tosh's solo album. That was the final straw. Tosh and Bunny walked away from the Wailers in 1974, calling out Blackwell for what they saw as disrespect and bias. Tosh would even mockingly call him white worst. Tosh wrote or co-wrote some of the group's biggest songs: Get Up, Stand Up, No Sympathy, and 400 Years. After leaving, he launched a solo career, signing with CBS Records and Rolling Stones Records, determined to speak his truth on his own terms. Solo career. When Peter Tosh dropped his solo debut, Legalize It, in 1976, he didn't just release an album, he launched a musical Molotov cocktail. The title track became an anthem for weed advocates, Rastafarians, and reggae lovers across the globe. But Tosh wasn't in it for popularity. He had a message, and he was going to shout it, sing it, and light it on fire if he had to. After recording the album at Treasure Isle, Tosh built his own musical army, a band called Word Sound and Power. This crew became his go-to squad on tour and in the studio. When he followed up with Equal Rights in 1907, it was clear Tosh wasn't trying to win over the charts. He was fighting for justice. That album included the iconic Get Up, Stand Up, co-written with Bob Marley, and a fierce take on Stepping Razor that later made it onto the Rockers soundtrack. Then came 1978, and things got louder. That year, Rolling Stones Records signed Tosh, and his album Bush Doctor came out swinging. It featured Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and their duet on Don't Look Back gave Tosh a wider audience. But he didn't tone it down, he turned it up. At the One Love Peace concert that same year, Tosh walked on stage, sparked a giant spliff, and laid into Jamaican politicians like he was running the courtroom. He called out Michael Manley and Edward Seaga for failing to legalize cannabis and made it clear he wasn't afraid of consequences. That moment put a target on his back. Soon after, he was arrested in Halfway Tree Square, accused of smoking in public and assaulting an officer. Tosh later reported he was brutally beaten in custody, ending up with head injuries and a broken hand. Still, he didn't flinch. His next albums, Mystic Man, 1979, and Wanted Dread and Alive, 1981, continued pushing buttons. Tosh was trying to break into mainstream success without watering down his views. He never reached Marley's level of global stardom, but his voice remained one of reggae's boldest. Things got even more heated when he showed up at the No Nukes concerts at Madison Square Garden in 1979. Tosh wore Palestinian attire and lit another joint right in the middle of the Jewish New Year. The crowd? Not exactly thrilled. Though his performance had been promoted for the live album and movie, he was cut from both. Still, that keffiyeh became part of his performance look for years. By 1984, after dropping Mama Africa the previous year, Tosh stepped back. He left the spotlight, seeking spiritual healing in Africa and trying to untangle himself from contracts he believed to tie him to South Africa, something he deeply opposed. His frustration with EMI had been growing, especially over what he saw as their failure to properly support his work. Even in exile, Tosh kept fighting. He played at anti-apartheid events and kept releasing music that tackled injustice head-on. Songs like Apartheid, Fight On, and Not Gonna Give It Up weren't just lyrics, they were declarations. In 1987, the fire seemed to pay off. No Nuclear War, his final album, earned him a Grammy for Best Reggae Performance. After years of being seen as reggae's radical outsider, Peter Tosh was finally getting the recognition he deserved. Personal life. Most reggae legends walk onto stage with a mic and maybe some backup singers. Peter Tosh? He'd roll in on a unicycle, riding backwards, hopping, grinning like it was just another Tuesday. That's the kind of person he was, bold, unpredictable, and never afraid to do things differently. By the late 1960s, Tosh, along with Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer, had embraced the Rastafari movement. This wasn't a casual belief system for them. It was a full spiritual commitment. They were baptized into the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, deeply inspired by the teachings surrounding Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, who Rastas viewed as divine in human form, or at the very least, a direct messenger from the heavens. For Tosh, this wasn't about image. His connection to the faith would influence his music, his politics, and his personal life for decades. But let's not pretend Tosh was your average prophet-like figure. Between albums, political rants, and fiery live shows, he picked up an unusual hobby, unicycling. And we're not talking about clumsy, wobbly riding either. Tosh could ride forwards, backwards, and even hop while keeping his balance. Fans at his concerts never knew what to expect, and when he pedaled onto the stage on one wheel, it was pure magic, and maybe just a little chaotic. Behind the scenes, Tosh's personal life was a mix of deep love, devastating loss, and a very large family tree. In 1973, tragedy struck when his girlfriend, Yvonne, died in a brutal car crash, the same accident that left Tosh with a fractured skull and emotional scars that lingered. Still, he kept moving, fueled by grief and grit. Later, in the early 1980s, Tosh entered into a relationship with Marlene Brown. She was just 21 when they got together in 1982, and the relationship lasted about 5 years. Marlene was more than just a partner. She stood by him during one of the most intense and controversial periods of his life and career. As for his children, Tosh didn't just leave behind music. He left behind a big legacy of little revolutionaries. He had 10 kids, each from different chapters in his life. His eldest, Carlos Andrew, was born in 1967. Gamal Jawara, whose mother was Melody Cunningham, would later go on to honor his father's name in his own ways. Then there were Aldrina Michelle and the youngest, Niambi. The rest of his children included sons Horace David, Stephen, and Nabi, along with daughters Sheba, Camila Rone, and Toby. While Peter Tosh is remembered for his bold lyrics and unwavering activism, his life offstage reveals just how layered he really was. He wasn't just the rebel, the Rasta, or the rocker. He was also a dad, a spiritual seeker, and the kind of guy who could hop a unicycle on stage while preaching about injustice. From lighting joints on live TV to preaching spiritual truths and raising a small tribe of future leaders, Tosh lived like no one else and left behind a story no one could replicate. Death. Peter Tosh spent his life fighting for justice, freedom, and truth. But in a twist as heartbreaking as it is chilling, the man who stood up to governments and record execs was gunned down in his own home by someone he once tried to help. It was September 11th, 1987. Tosh had just returned to his house in Kingston, Jamaica, when 3 men arrived on motorcycles. They weren't there for autographs or small talk. They wanted cash. One of them was Dennis Lepo Laban, a man Tosh had known for years. In fact, Tosh had gone out of his way to help Lobon after a long prison sentence, even trying to find him work. That loyalty, it ended in betrayal. Tosh told the intruders he didn't have money in the house, but they didn't believe him. Instead of leaving, they stayed for hours, torturing him, demanding he hand over cash they were convinced he had stashed somewhere. As the standoff dragged on, friends and colleagues who stopped by to see Tosh were pulled into the nightmare. Everyone who came to visit that evening was taken hostage, and then the violence exploded. When it became clear they wouldn't get what they wanted, the gunmen opened fire. Tosh was shot in the head, twice, and died instantly. He wasn't alone. 2 other people were also killed, Wilton Doc Brown, a well-known herbalist, and Jeff Free Eye Dixon, a beloved DJ and cultural figure in Jamaica. Several others were injured in the chaos, including Tosh's partner Andrea Marlene Brown, Free Eye's wife Yvonne, known as Joy, Tosh's drummer Carlton Santa Davis, and musician Michael Robinson. Jamaica was stunned. The reggae community was shattered. One of its fiercest voices, gone, not to age or illness, but to senseless violence at the hands of a man he had once trusted. Police eventually caught up with Lobon, who turned himself in. 2 other suspects were questioned, but never publicly named. At trial, Lobon claimed he had nothing to do with the attack and was just out drinking that night. But the court didn't buy it. The trial, held behind closed doors because of the involvement of unlicensed weapons, ended with a jury of 8 women and 4 men finding him guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. That sentence didn't stick. In '95, Lobon's punishment was reduced, and he remained behind bars. One of the other suspects walked free due to lack of evidence, and the 3rd person involved, never identified. The murder of Peter Tosh wasn't just a tragedy. It was a gut punch to everyone who believed in what he stood for. A man who spent his life speaking truth to power and helping others was gunned down by someone who mistook kindness for weakness. And yet, even in death, Tosh's voice never faded. His legacy lives on in every rebel lyric, every fight for fairness, and every time someone says what needs to be said, even if it's uncomfortable, because that's what Peter did, right until the end. Tosh and the Rolling Stones come together. Back in 1978, it looked like a match made in music heaven. Peter Tosh, fresh off the success of his solo albums, including the 1976 classic Legalize It, was ready to take his sound beyond Jamaica's shores. The Rolling Stones, already rock legends, seemed like the perfect launchpad. They signed Tosh to their boutique label, promising to bring his reggae beats to a wider global audience. The collaboration kicked off strong. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards didn't just sit on the sidelines. They stepped into the studio and co-produced 3 tracks for Tosh's album Bush Doctor. To top it off, Tosh opened for the Rolling Stones on their 1978 North American tour, giving fans a chance to see this reggae rebel live before the rock giants took the stage. One highlight from this partnership was the duo performance of a cover of The Temptations' You Gotta Walk and Don't Look Back. The song became the lead single from Bush Doctor and brought Tosh some well-deserved attention. It cracked the Billboard pop charts in the US, peaking at number 84, and climbed even higher in the UK, reaching number 43. Not bad for a reggae artist crossing over into rock territory. Still, the numbers tell a story of cautious success rather than smashing triumph. Before teaming with the Rolling Stones, Tosh's albums hadn't exactly set fire to the pop charts. Legalize It just sneaked onto the Billboard 200 at number 199, although it did better in the UK, hitting number 54. Equal Rights, his 1977 release, failed to chart at all in the US and UK. With Bush Doctor, things improved a bit. The album climbed to number 104 in America, a decent step forward, but nowhere near the massive impact of Bob Marley's records. Tosh had undeniable talent and message, but mainstream pop success was still just out of reach. The partnership wasn't all smooth sailing, though. Despite releasing 2 more albums under the Rolling Stones label, Tosh's relationship with the band and their label soured over time. Reports suggest creative differences and dissatisfaction with how Tosh's music was handled behind the scenes. The alliance that once seemed promising ended up fracturing, leaving Tosh to continue his career without the Stones' backing. Still, the experience opened doors for Tosh and introduced his music to new audiences. His work with the Rolling Stones marked an important chapter, one where reggae and rock briefly intertwined on a larger stage. While the collaboration didn't reach legendary status, it remains a fascinating example of genre crossover in the late 70s music scene. Peter Tosh's bold move to team up with rock's biggest names showed his desire to push boundaries, to grow, and to fight for his place in the global spotlight. Though the partnership had its ups and downs, Tosh's influence and message continued to echo far beyond Jamaica, proving that sometimes, even imperfect collaborations can leave a lasting mark. No push. Peter Tosh was no stranger to talent or conviction, but when it came to cracking the mainstream music scene in the US and UK, things didn't exactly go according to plan. Before signing with the Rolling Stones label, Tosh's albums were quietly simmering under the radar. His debut solo record, Legalize It, barely managed to scrape into the Billboard 200, landing at a lowly number 199 in America. Across the pond, it did a bit better, reaching number 54 on the UK charts. Meanwhile, his follow-up, Equal Rights from 1907, didn't make a dent in the charts on either side of the Atlantic. Things seemed to pick up steam when Tosh linked up with Rolling Stones Records. His 1978 album Bush Doctor fared better, climbing to number 104 in the US. Not a blockbuster hit, but a noticeable improvement. The lead single, a cover duet with Mick Jagger called You Gotta Walk and Don't Look Back, found its way onto the Billboard pop charts, hitting number 84 in America and climbing to number 43 in the UK for Tosh. This was progress, though it still wasn't quite the Bob Marley-level breakthrough that many fans hoped for. But here's the catch. The upward trend stalled. Tosh's later releases under the Stones banner didn't build much more momentum. Sales and chart positions barely budged, and this frustration began to weigh heavily on Tosh. According to Step and Razor, a biography by John Masuri, several people close to Tosh reported that the reggae legend was growing increasingly upset about what he saw as a lack of proper promotion from the Rolling Stones camp. From the label's perspective, they had a gifted artist who hadn't quite found his groove in the international market. Tosh wasn't exactly the type to adjust his style or soften his message for mass appeal. Mick Jagger once shared some insight with Rolling Stone magazine. Peter was an edgy guy and was frustrated a lot of the time. Bob Marley got so big, and that probably annoyed him. There was a simmering tension between Tosh's uncompromising stance and the commercial realities of the music business. This tension wasn't just about chart numbers. Tosh's music carried fire, political statements, calls for justice, and calls to action that weren't exactly radio-friendly. Meanwhile, Marley's rise was rapid and more accessible to a broader audience, which undoubtedly rubbed Tosh the wrong way. In the end, Peter Tosh's experience with the Stones label highlights the tricky balance between artistic integrity and commercial success. He wasn't about to change who he was for the sake of climbing the charts, even if that meant watching others soar while he fought to make his voice heard. Tosh's story is a reminder that sometimes talent and passion don't automatically translate into chart-topping hits. But even without massive commercial success, his influence and legacy in reggae and activism remain undeniable, and his music still commands respect for refusing to bow to the pressures of the mainstream. Keith and Peter were not a fit. Peter Tosh didn't just want to play reggae in Jamaica, he wanted the world to listen. His duet with Mick Jagger on Don't Look Back and his later cover of Johnny B. Good were clear attempts to reach a wider crowd and boost record sales. Yet despite these moves, the money didn't exactly start rolling in. Tosh's straightforward, fiery nature wasn't the easiest match for Keith Richards, the Rolling Stones' famously laid-back and sharp-witted guitarist. Their dynamic? Let's just say it wasn't all harmony. A memorable story from reggae promoter Warren Smith in Step and Razor tells of Tosh borrowing an expensive vintage guitar from Richards, and then holding on to it longer than expected. Spoiler, Richards wasn't thrilled. That guitar tale was just the start. Multiple sources say Tosh's presence in Richards' Jamaican home eventually wore thin. According to the Natural Mystics and other accounts, when Richards came back to claim his house, Tosh allegedly threatened him. Richards, known for his cool but no-nonsense attitude, apparently took the threat in stride, showing he wasn't about to back down. Some folks believe this incident got blown out of proportion, but others add a darker twist. Rumors suggest Richards once held a gun to Tosh's head, demanding he leave. If true, it's clear their relationship was more than just a little tense. At the end of the day, Rolling Stones Records was a business. Tosh's albums under the label didn't turn the expected profit, and the relationship came to a close after 1981's Wanted, Dread, and Alive. Whether the split was more about unmet expectations or clashing personalities, the fact remained Tosh hadn't become the international superstar the label hoped for. It's easy to wonder if things might have gone differently. Could the Stones have pushed harder to promote Tosh? Tosh was known for his fierce independence and unwillingness to compromise his vision, which clashed with the commercial machinery of a major label. Meanwhile, Richards and the Stones operated with their own rhythms, sometimes at odds with the fiery reggae icon's style. This story isn't just about missed business opportunities or musical mismatches. It's a reminder that even legends can clash when worlds collide. Tosh's time with the Stones showed that crossing genres and cultures isn't always smooth sailing, especially when strong personalities and big egos are involved. Despite the tension and eventual fallout, Tosh's efforts to expand his sound and reach new fans remain an important chapter in his legacy. He pushed boundaries, challenged norms, and never backed down, even when it meant facing off with rock royalty on his home turf. In the end, the Tosh-Richards saga is a wild human story behind the music, proof that even icons can get caught in drama, worthy of a rock ballad or reggae anthem. When reggae fire meets rock and roll swagger, sparks are bound to fly, and that's exactly what happened between Peter Tosh and the Rolling Stones. What started as a promising partnership quickly showed cracks, with creative clashes and personality clashes turning up the heat behind the scenes. Tosh's fierce independence and raw honesty didn't always gel with the Stones' business mindset and laid-back vibe. Despite some memorable collaborations and moments on stage, the relationship ultimately fizzled, leaving both sides with what-ifs and lessons learned. Peter Tosh stayed true to his voice, refusing to soften his message for mass appeal, and the Rolling Stones moved on with their rock empire. Their story is a vivid reminder that even legendary talents can struggle to find common ground when worlds collide. If you found this dive into musical friction fascinating, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more stories that uncover the real beats behind the music.